Hello again.
Hello again.
I've just got a couple questions here, so evidently everything got answered in the course of the school. If I get too tired, I'll let me move on to stand up again. Thank you. Well, one is always a challenge to answer, and the other is unanswerable. So, the Baha'i position on homosexuality is very difficult for many, particularly youth, with the current social focus on acceptance. How can we respond to these concerns? I think, first of all, we understand the principle in the faith that he shall not be asked of his doings. So from Baha'i point of view, we don't seek the answer to this within the faith. It's defined, and it's one of the laws that's derived from the verses of the Akta, so that's clear. In explaining this to others, we have to say that we have standards and guidance within our Baha'i community that we're following. But we don't in any way expect to impose this on the general public. These are matters that are being carried forward by civil discussions, human rights, and so on, and we wish everyone well in the process. Within the faith, which we understand is the guidance that God has sent us to spiritualize us, to prepare us to enter the next realm of existence, he stresses that the two veils keeping man from his maker are self-love, ego, on one hand, and carnal desires on the other. And as far as joy in sexuality, it is not highly emphasized in the faith. We view sex as something that is to take place only between a man and the woman who is his wife. So all kinds of variety and variation on that are challenged to the Baha'is. But this, they understand, is the way to attain to spiritual ascendancy, to expansion of consciousness. I myself think it's helpful to say to non-Baha'is that we don't expect to impose these standards outside of the faith, but that we do believe that they are the means of attaining spiritual happiness for human beings. And we can't tell you why, except that we believe this is a message that comes from our Creator, and He understands our nature better than we do.
Hooper?
Yes, sir.
Related to that specific question, could you perhaps add insight to our community received, and I don't know if all communities received, but our community received a packet, which was a deepening packet on this subject. And very shortly after we received the packet, we received a call from the National Spiritual Assembly not to deepen, even as a community, on that material. No?
I didn't get the material, so I don't know which it is, except that perhaps they didn't want so much emphasis in it with the other activities that are going on, or the House of Justice asked them not to hold back on it.
Yeah.
There's nothing secret about that. I mean, the House of Justice has issued several letters, very elaborate letters, certainly lifting any veil or confusion about homophobia, for example, where we have to love everyone. They're all the creatures of God. Certainly people with challenges of all natures need to find the cause. And also, both the House of Justice and the Guardian said we shouldn't be inspecting the lives of each other. The Baha'is have to know the rules and try their best to follow them. They reported some variations in this from Toronto to the Guardian while he was still alive, and he wrote back and he said that if we begin investigating the lives of individual believers, we will end up with no Baha'is. Well, that's the truth. You have the protection. The only time that such issues as immoral behavior and so on, or displays of drunkenness in public, when they impinge on the good name of the faith in the media or in public circles, then the assemblies have to look into the matter. And looking into the matter usually consists of a warning of sorts that's saying, do you understand the Baha'i teachings on this subject? And then the assembly would like you to make efforts to direct your activities in a different manner. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, maybe 5 times the warning. It isn't peremptory. And it would have to be continued public displays inappropriate for the faith. That's not for you and me, that's for local assemblies. Action that local assemblies might take. But we might be referring the assembly to the fact that such things has happened and is causing consternation amongst people. That used to be the case. Now it's more our position on it that's more arresting than any misbehavior of the Baha'is, because the public misbehaves worse than any of the Baha'is could work out, I think, most part. Is there any aspect to that you'd want to ask about? What do Baha'is teach about gay marriage? It's not our concern. In the faith, we don't have gay marriage, but we realize that in the civil society that is a matter to be decided by civil society. So we don't have axes to grind or public issues to denounce. Pull back from that. I wanted to mention, with respect to the conversations today about our non-involvement in politics and party politics, the Guardian wrote a very revealing letter to one of the National Assemblies about the temple guides. He said temple guides will be oftentimes provoked with questions about politics and what the Baha'is teach about this or about that political figure or so on. And he said they must be scrupulous in not engaging in such discussions. To say simply that we don't enter into party politics and we don't interfere with government policies. That in itself sometimes seems to us, when we hear about it, as limiting in some way, or we'll have them say, well, don't you care about the future of mankind? Don't you care about anything? Shoghi Effendi goes on in this letter to say, raise the conversation immediately to the international level and say that too few are devoting their lives and attention to promoting international amity, unity amongst the nations, recognition of the oneness and wholeness of mankind, and the eventual implementation of those steps which will preserve universal peace. And that's what the Baha'is are about. It's not that we're about nothing. It's not that we don't care about where the world is going. We're addressing it at the international level, universal level. I think that's a very helpful definition from the Guardian. I'm sorry I'm paraphrasing it, but you can find the letter. It's published. And that's a good thing to know.
So what happens if a gay couple that is married, has a civil marriage, then decides to become Baha'is? What happens with their marriage?
What happens is that they can't become Baha'is while they're engaged in a marriage of that type. There was a couple that neither the community knew they were a couple. They were coming all the time to the meetings, so they became Baha'is, and then later they heard that there was no gay marriage within the faith. But they had been enjoying their activities in the Baha'i community, and they wrote the National Assembly that the easiest thing that they they will return to being part of the community of interest. And as a community of interest, they got to get married, that's their business. When they understood that they couldn't remain Baha'is in that relationship. Now that's not going to be popular. Eventually it's going to get into the press. Hold your breath. But it's going to publicize the faith at the same time. In an odd way, you know. I mean, there are a lot of people that are not wholly in line with everything that's happening and think that human beings have a higher order of life and so on. It's becoming so generalized, the idea of homosexuality. I think that it is going to be a tough nut for us to deal with.
Yeah, when we look at our daughter in middle school, I don't know too many of her friends that don't identify as trans, pan, bi, or the 72 other versions of homosexuality out there.
Yeah, no, it's
there are not too many
very
kids right now identifying in large.
You can't mention God in school, but you can mention the importance of you choosing your own gender.
Right.
And there have been cases of children being taken away from adults where the children complained in the school that their mommy wasn't letting them change into being a girl. This was in Toronto newspapers last year. It's very strange. It's strange stuff. So much for the parents saying, and when you're 18, you can make your own decisions about this, which is, I think, certainly that would be the position of Baha'i parents, I would think. But it's going to be a lot of splitting of the ways, so to speak. It doesn't make Baha'u'llah less Baha'u'llah. And he is the Lord of the Covenant, and he is here to carry humanity to another stage on behalf of the God that created and sustains us. So I think that, I don't know, I feel like this explaining that we have this pattern in our own faith, we have decisions. Earlier on, I heard Baha'is answering, what's the position of the Baha'is on homosexuality? They said, the position of the Baha'is on homosexuality is identical with that of all the other great religions of mankind. Next question. If you don't want to get into it or you don't feel like you can explain it, you can just say that that's always been a position of that. Which shows to us that it's not a matter of great importance from a spiritual point of view.
But there are some other Christian remnants, particularly, that are conducting gay marriages.
Oh yes, no, that's true.
Which, you know, if you wanted to pursue it and say this isn't in concert with your teachings.
Okay. If they say no, we know some religions that do. No, you know some churches that do. You know some denominations that might. But in general, the position of the great religions is
themselves.
I would think that your conversation would actually be a little different if you were talking to Baha'i parents what they should tell their children.
That's an interesting question. I haven't worked that through myself.
Well, because
it is already an adult.
Every TV show has gay couples now.
Yeah.
And so forth. So
the most natural. It's being pushed to become the most natural thing possible.
So it seems like Baha'is have to tell their children what the Baha'i law is.
I think so. That would be.
And then the children, I think you can't leave it to the children. You know, I think you need to tell the children that's not the way we think you should conduct your life.
I think you're absolutely right in that. I don't know how you're handling it as parents. You're obviously handling it already, so. But I think that's true. Please.
Well, I think something that a lot of Baha'is probably don't fully understand, that this is about chastity, and heterosexual people have just as much trouble obeying chastity laws as homosexual people do. And the reality is that this whole explosion of sexuality in the media allows promiscuity. So this isn't just about homosexual relationships or heterosexual relationships without marriage. It's about promiscuity. And that's extremely damaging to individuals' psyche, emotional stability, spiritual wellness, and so forth. And it's difficult for me to talk to my gay friends about the prohibition against gay marriage in the Baha'i faith. It's hard to explain that. But I know enough about the world to know that there's a great deal of promiscuity going on in all groups of people. And this is really, I think, at the core of what the problem is.
One of the things about science is they say things sometimes ahead of having proofs.
Yeah.
That it's now accepted that homosexuality is, you're born that way, and if you're born that way, then why shouldn't you have rights to act on the way you feel? Which makes perfect sense, except the premise is wrong. You're not born that way. Shoghi Effendi says it's an illness. This is not a popular statement to make in public, obviously. But it does tell us that there is something that happens to the child at a very early stage, which puts them in that tendency. We've been created man or woman. And except for, a very minimum amount of people who are babies who are on the line, but that's so minimal that the majority of the cases are otherwise. So I think maybe we need to explain to our children that too. I don't know how that works out, but the point is that this is not, God hasn't created people that way and then denies them the right to marriage and sexuality. So it's a difficult challenge for everybody. Well, we should try to get it straight in our own minds what the teachings of the faith say and read these letters carefully that the House of Justice has prepared.
Our family has a young friend that is transgender, and this all happened when the child was very young. So we knew the child as one gender when they were a baby into toddlerhood, and then now the child's identifying as a different gender, so we had to learn a different name and things. Yeah. And that was very odd for my children because we knew this child was somebody else. So what we as a family have focused on is does this person still have the capacity to show kindness and courtesy, and we focused on virtues. And we've obviously talked about what the Baha'i laws are, but that's how we handled it, of focusing on that person still has the ability to reflect the qualities of God regardless of their gender.
Regardless of their gender view.
Right.
Because, even this fellow who was doing sex operations in New York from the beginning recently came out with an article, and he says that in his understanding, with all the years that he's had of sex changes, no one's permanently changes their sex. It doesn't happen. You can force it, maintain it in another direction, but if you stop the kind of medication or supplements, it goes back the other way. So, and now we're hearing about children who've made that choice, and when they're 18, they decide they don't want it. They want to go back the other way, and it's not always possible. So I think parents have to think through if they can wait till the child is older. If you have a child that's insisting themselves because of what they're hearing at school, because the school is preaching that to them, I think you have to try to encourage them to live a little older so that the choice remains open for you. I don't know, that's a personal view of mine, but I should think that would be a sensible position, please.
I think it's easier to just trust Shoghi Effendi, even though what he said isn't politically correct right now, but it could be, he's always decades ahead of us, always, in other ways.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to realize that it's not that he was behind the way of science that has now discovered that this is natural and normal. So it isn't the case. I can consider it the case. And I don't know how it's going to evolve. We're all on stage waiting to hear what's going to happen next. It's exciting. Now, here, see if you can answer this question. How do other species of humans, such as Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, fit into the Baha'i teachings? Why did they become extinct? I know of nothing in the Baha'i teachings to answer that question. Nothing. And as I'm not a prophet myself, I cannot propose an answer. Not so simple. Yes?
DNA has been extracted from Homo neanderthalis, and it is shown that we are related. You get on 23andMe or National Geographic, send them the sample of spit, and they will tell you how much Neanderthal you are, how much of that genome you have in your genome. And in this sense, I trust science.
Yeah.
Abdul Baha said that we have looked differently at different times.
Yes.
I think the fossil record probably traces our development as a species. That seed that was man, as Baha'u'llah said, that seed that was man, was always there and was always distinct. We are not animals, we are man, but we didn't start, boom, 1 million years ago. There was something before that evolved into us. My understanding.
Yeah, I think that we turn to science for this understanding, since we don't have it specified in the teachings. As far as I know, maybe there'll be something points untranslated still. Please, John.
I put that in the same drawer of obscurity where Baha'u'llah talks about the prophets that are unknown and civilizations that are past. And so I don't know anything about, obviously, those civilizations that are past, the prophets that are unknown. Whether or not they were part of Neanderthal or something else, it's like I say, that big drawer of obscurity.
Fair enough.
Well, science says we've looked this way, the way we do now. We've looked this way for 60 million years.
Oh, no.
So wrap that with all the other things you've heard.
That's a very old scientist.
Where do you
The new translation of Unanswered Questions also broadens the applicability of many of the things that we thought were so.
True. That is true. Friends, I don't know if you have any other questions.
Would
Please.
you repeat what you told me today about, I say, loving, how we learn in the next world, because I love books in this world?
Oh, yes. The question was, I love books in this world, how am I going to get along in the next world where there are no books? But how is it? Baha'u'llah himself, he says, I'm quoting from the chrysolite tablet of such and such. This is the line 4 and 5 of that, or something. Obviously, we have writings in the other world. That's the archetype of our own writings. And it's from that infinite model that's flowing into the manifestation and translated into our human language that we have our literature. Why are we going to be deprived of it? We will attain to the mother book himself. So I don't know. I wouldn't imagine. And I went off the deep end saying, well, there's universities in the next world. We hear about references to universities. Abdullah talks about the University of the Kingdom, and John told us the story about Howard Colby Ives being prepared as a professor in the University of the Kingdom. We have the general statement, which I think we should all, really ponder and meditate on, that everything in this world has come from that world. The design of everything is there. This is simply the coding of the ideas pouring into this universe from the kingdom. So if we have government, they have government. If we have food, they have food. If we have clothing, they have clothing. If we have houses, they have houses. It's there first before it comes here. This is something that I think is helpful to us. Realize our senses are not physical powers. They're manifested as physical powers in our body, but they're eternal spiritual powers. They exist when our eyes are closed and we're not seeing. We see in dreams. We see everything. We see color. We see food. We see terror sometimes too. So I don't know. We should be very cautious about saying that the next world, well, I'll miss, when I talk about ice cream or something.
Is there chocolate in the next world?
Well, the chocolate here is only a shadow.
The chocolate there, yes. Please.
So you mentioned yesterday that there's no salaries for the members of the House of Justice, but you get a living stipend. But knowing that many of the members have served for 10, 20, or 30 years, how do you raise a family? How do you care? How do you?
That would be part of the stipend. Would be adjusted to your family needs, whatever they are. And I can tell you that the standard at the World Center, those that were there long term as custodians of the holy places or in the offices, the stipend was exactly the same as that for house members, which put a big strain on us because we were expected to dress in suit and tie all the time. I must say that was a challenge for me. Yes.
I'd like to know if you, I brought up the earlier thing about not dwelling on the unpleasant things of life. And, it's so hard to then move on with horrors in your life. Is there any more writings or references that you run across that might help people move on and not dwell on the unpleasant things in life?
I think you also mentioned the idea of replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts.
You need more.
In the Igon, in the section about the true seeker, he says to consume every wayward thought with the flame of his loving mention. This is a very important formula for us. Every wayward thought. We want to be very cautious about thinking and feeling negatively about each other. In the book, I quoted a letter that hadn't been published in the Forces of Our Time, where Shoghi Effendi makes it clear that if the Baha'i feels and thinks negatively about other Baha'is or others in general, he opens himself to the dark forces of life. What are the dark forces of life? He says we should study the dark forces of life. We should make a list of the ones that Shoghi Effendi at least mentions. Right at the top is irreligion, communism, these false gods, the anger, the passion, all these are negative forces which come into us. Envy, another one. You can list about 35 that Shoghi Effendi has actually named in different settings. But what's so interesting about that is that it isn't not speaking negatively. That would be backbiting, we know about that. He says thinking and feeling negatively. And the whole point is that Shoghi Effendi said he didn't think that by the Baha'is having thoughts of peace that we would be able to prevent war. Fair enough. But we don't want to have thoughts of war in our own reality because that blocks the light of his divine guidance that's supposed to illumine us. So we want to keep moving off negative subjects as fast as we can. And of course they're coming at us from all sides. But I think that generally the life of devotion of a Baha'i, the fact that we read verses of God in the morning and evening and we have our obligatory prayers and we do our fast annually, all this helps us to be able to deflect negative thinking. It's not that we don't see what's going on in the world, but we have to realize it's not healthy for us and certainly not healthy for the Baha'i community if we're holding hostility against other members of the community. Okay, I've forgiven so-and-so, he told me I have to forgive, but forget, I can't forget. So you're still, this negative quality is dominating your thought. You want to move beyond that. I think this is a very serious subject, essential to our going forward with communities where we are loving and united. We are loving and united because of Baha'u'llah, not because of each other. Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi both say if we look at each other, if we look at one another, we can find infinite imperfections. And then he tells us that you know your imperfections more than the other people. And they're even seeing them or inventing them sometimes, which isn't very pleasant. So by our closeness with the manifestation, with his spirit, by becoming the hollow reed that we heard about the other days, that he can, it's his music that's going to play through it, but it's not going to play naturally if it's all clogged up with our recriminations and upsets with other people. And I think it's clear enough from what are in the teachings that there's nothing that anybody can do to us that's so bad that we cannot forgive and forget. We can be weak and not be able to forgive and forget, but there isn't anything that God's going to throw that at us. If Abdu'l-Baha can pray for the people that tried to poison him and plan his murder and so on in his will and testament, that's the example for us. It doesn't mean that what people did is right and so should be forgotten, although it's not our role to go after people. We're supposed to have a forgiving eye towards everyone. The assemblies, if things get out of hand, then they have to address them. But as individuals and for our own spiritual health, we got to get this right. Postscript, P.S. on this point. The prayer, "O God, refresh and gladden my spirit," has come out of the prayer book because there's no original text for it. Doesn't mean you can't say it. Yeah, it's the first thing everybody memorizes. It's strange enough. Seems mostly.
Where does it come from? Most applicable.
So we didn't know for a long time. Last year I found in reading diary notes of the secretaries of Abdu'l-Baha after he returned from the United States. One evening he was talking to the friends and he said, "Say to yourself, O God, refresh and gladden my spirit." And it's an oral transmission, so it's like a pilgrim note. But that isn't good enough to keep in the prayer book. But it does mean that it has some reflection from Abdu'l-Baha. So I don't think you have to unmemorize it or anything of the sort. I'll tell you, we had two of them that came up at the same time. The prayer book was thoroughly looked to find the counterparts of everything. And the other one that we have no text for at all, and we haven't resolved it, but the house said it's too soon to take both of them out, is oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants, which is the second one we all memorize. The two human prayers are the ones that attract us and we memorize. It's strange, very strange. But bear that in mind when you're planning holy day programs and things like that. It's easy enough to put that prayer in and it's still all right, but you may want to think about another one that has firmer roots. And if you follow the character of that, unite the hearts of thy servants. Thou art more friend to me than I am to myself, all that kind of thing. It's not the way prayers normally finish. Sir?
The first prayer I memorized was, "Oh God, guide me, protect me." And then when they changed that, it blew my mind.
But they changed the wording, but not the meaning. Right. It's, they brought it closer to the original language. And that's going to happen with other texts as well. Not with the Guardian's translations, but other translations. Look what's happened now to some answered questions.
The librarian's discounting the unity prayer here.
Sale going fast. There's 4 left.
I want to go back to changing the negative to the positive. And the best illustration I've heard of that was when you were talking about translation for Dr. Mahajer when someone asked about drinking wine.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to share that with the group.
Well, it's interesting. This was in a public meeting in Peru, in Lima, Peru, and the counselors had met there with the Hand of the Cause, and afterwards he had a press interview, and after that he had a public meeting in the hotel, which had quite a crowd of people. And Dr. Mahajer presented a short picture of the faith. I was the translator into Spanish. Okay. That was one of the most brilliant presentations on the faith I've ever heard. Because he was so intense, he was spontaneous, and he had this terrific confirmation that was coming. So he made a picture of the faith, in 20 minutes that was an overview that just drew everybody in, to the point where they had nothing to say. They sat in absolute stillness. Talk ended, nobody moves, nobody says anything. The chairman of the NSA saunters over to me and says, will he take some questions? Will Dr. Mahajer take questions? I said, Dr. Mahajer, will you take any questions? I was disturbed by the idea of questions, because it had settled so well on the people. It had such a magnetic effect on them. Why mess it up, you know? And he said, okay, we'll take questions. So, of course, the man in the third row with the big red nose raises his hand and he says, what about wine? I thought to myself, I had to translate that to the hand of the cause. He's asking that. He said, I'm so glad you've asked that question. The Baha'i writings are full of references to wine. The wine of astonishment, the wine of divine guidance, the wine of this, the wine of that. It's a terrific example for us. And he said, if you taste one of those wines, you'll never want to take another taste of that other wine. Next question. Yeah.
I'm not sure how I'll ask this. Sort of for a person that has been reading your book and started feeling like this idea of darkness started taking on the entity of the devil. And whereas their understanding had been darkness is the absence of light. And so I think the comment had been made in this discussion of, well, there's the ego, which is not an entity, not the devil, et cetera, but would you address that?
That's a big subject. My goodness.
It is. Never mind.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Let's see what we understand about it. We understand we've been hearing about the whisperings of the evil one.
Yes.
Okay, which is there, and for a certain period represented Mirza Yahya himself, but it transcends that in Persian meditations and a few passages where he talks about this, the whisperings of the lower self. It's the whisperings of animal desire. We are both animals and human souls together. We have two parts to ourselves, spiritual and material. The physical constantly sends suggestions to us about delightful, material, sexual, whatever it happens to send. I think it sends different ones to women and men, but in any case, it sends them continually without stopping and requires, Shoghi Effendi, as I was mentioning, daily vigilance in countering them. If you don't embrace them, you don't take the imagination and look at the imagination and decide to take its clothes off or something like that, okay, that's one thing. You pull back from that and you hold to the teachings that I have to be detached from these things and this is not according to the teachings and whatever it is you say that goes back to that. Every wayward thought with the flame of his loving mention. This loving mention is also remembrance, this loving remembrance, this loving praise. It's all zikr in that word. It's an Arabic word, and it means praise, remembrance, and mention, all simultaneously. So the house of worship is the house of the remembrances of God, but it's also a house of the praises of God. It's the house where God is mentioned. It's it's hard to separate them. The Guardian says, for example, remembrance of God is the healer of all thine ills. It's the healer of everything. So that's where we keep wanting to turn. And perhaps the easiest way to remember him when a thought comes to us that we don't want to engage and develop is to say Allahu Akbar in our hearts, to use his name, Allahu Akbar. Bismillah Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Bismillah Akbar is in the name of the All-Glorious, which Baha'u'llah says, use at the beginning of every enterprise. Whisper it to yourselves. What enterprise greater than you want to talk about the faith with someone? Just before you say, oh, I know, I'm going to talk to them about this, or I'm going to answer that, in your heart, in your mind, you say, Bismillah, in the name of Baha'u'llah, in the name of the All-Glorious. Help me to say the right thing. Because after all, we're trying to be reeds without, that the pith is gone from, so that the melody will be clear and perfect and touching.
You're saying this?
Pith. Whatever is stuck in the middle of the reeds.
Thank you. Okay.
That's apart from something's really pithy.
Yes, I understand.
That's another reason.
That was another version of that word.
Anyhow, so there are evil influences coming at us. We're, for example, counseled not to read the lies of the covenant breakers because they're not. It's not a question of truth. It's a question of poison. It has a negative effect on us. There are people that have to read them. Teaching in the World Center, we had to read. We had to see what the covenant breakers were up to, what they were, their correspondence, and what they were trying to convince people of. So there is a protection within the institutions to do that. Shoghi Effendi had people do that. He did it himself, obviously. So there's that. But basically, the talks about raising your thoughts. You have a thought of war, think of peace. They're in the end of Paris talks. And there's a few of those that I think it's always good for us to go back and look at again, because it helps to orient us with this. How do we keep our thoughts light and elevated and alert to, is this a waiting soul? Is that a waiting soul? Who am I going to talk to about the faith next? And in what manner? I don't know. It seems to me those are all connected together. Especially now, we're so few Baha'is in the world. We have a terrific... We're the only ones, he says, that can carry forward the cause. We have to communicate it. He's communicating the faith. He's delivering the faith through us. What are you going to wait? The House of Justice is going to teach everybody? It's sitting all day in meetings. You're the free ones. You're able to move around, meet new people. You're able to pray in the morning and meditate. Oh, God, guide me. Which one of my friends should I be following up with? Where should I be putting my attention? He says you make a large group of friends, and then you begin centering on the ones that seem more promising. And then you pay their attention to them until you instill in them an attraction to the cause and so on. Are we all doing that? Do you have somebody right now that you're working with? Ask yourself. How are you going to participate? What kind of face are you going to put when you go to the next world? It says you'll be issued into the company of the prophets and messengers of God. And they will ask you what you've suffered in the path of God. Well, if you haven't suffered very much, it's going to be a fairly short interview. If you've given your whole life for the faith, you'll be able to engage a long time with it.
Is it true that another person can debase you or abase you, or is it true that only I can abase myself? Or they can try, but if I don't accept it, is it true that they can't do it? They might do all sorts of things by spitting on you or doing all sorts of things.
That's kind of complicated, but I think that what you're saying is, you know the answer to it yourself. That they can't really harm you. People can say whatever they want. Ali Nakjawani was telling me one time, he said, if you're attacked personally, your character is attacked, he said, don't defend yourself. Mm-hmm. Let God be your defense. Don't rush to say whatever. You may deny it, I don't know, whatever. Depends what without the circumstances of each one of such events is singular, it's different, but let God defend you. He will defend you if you haven't made terrible mistakes. And if you've made terrible mistakes, you better go to Him to ask forgiveness, so that the defamers don't spread, the defamations don't spread. Very pleased to have made your acquaintance and to have had these days together in such a spirit of fellowship and inquiry and study of the writings. I wanted to say to you that I'm afraid I hadn't clarified sufficiently while I was speaking to you about the nature of the 5-year plan and the goals and things that we're engaged in. I have pulled back from being a specialist in those things and leave them, because I find the institutions themselves have different answers at different levels, leaves them to define. You asked me a question about procedure within the plan, or what should we do at this stage of this phase of that cycle of growth or something. I just refrain from it. And I go back to the individual responsibility we have to Baha'u'llah, which gives us the kind of energy and vitality to be able to withstand all of the various aspects of trying to fulfill the plan. So I'm certainly behind the plan and look forward to your own success in the plan. But I've felt it prudent, as from the position I'm coming from, to talk more on these spiritual subjects than on the technicalities and procedures, which are quite available, and there's a whole lot of messages about them. And I haven't dominated every aspect of it. I left the house in 2010, just before that long message came out. The longest Rizwan message we've ever had, I think, isn't it? Or was it to the counselors' conference? Yeah. So thank you very much for your friendship and your kindness and your love.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.